You know, normally we like to have, when we bring two people onto a stage, we like to have some sort of opposing viewpoints. The problem here is you guys are friends, and you're actually on the same board of the same company. You're on the Sky board.
Yep.
So can we gin up some sort of like pro wrestling controversy?
We can do it, yeah.
There's got to be something you're very angry about, right, with Jeremy?
Clearly,
No?
clearly. I have to think about it. It's going to take me a second.
All right, well, while you think about that, I've got a big overarching question for Jeremy. Even on that last panel, they were talking about the way media is evolving, and they were talking a bit about the way it's evolving. In the US, it's a big deal that people are talking about unbundling sort of the pay TV bundle and maybe delivering video via broadband and maybe allowing you to sort of buy individual channels. You guys have done that. That's what you're doing now. That has happened already today at Sky. And again, coming from the US, that's sort of amazing to sort of see that exists now and it's almost ho-hum. But obviously that wasn't an easy decision to make. So can we just start by talking about how you reached that decision that you would sort of start to break open the bundle on your own without being forced to?
Look, I think the start point, if you think of Sky as a business, we started by disrupting the incumbents at the time. When Sky was formed 20 odd years ago, we brought an entirely new way of consuming television which didn't exist. So I think, at the heart of the business has always been this idea that we really embrace change and renewal. We want to step into new opportunities. 20 odd years on, we've built a big business, but many people have chosen not to take Sky, and they've just simply said, not for me. So the way we think about new distribution platforms, different pricing and proposition, more a la carte services, are ways that we can speak to that part of the market who've chosen not to sign up today. Now we know to do that, we've got to offer something different. If we're just going to simply offer the same things in the same way, we're going to get diminishing returns. So for us, whilst you slightly worry about things like cannibalization, the effect it has on the current business, we just feel that it's much better to step into that and to really drive that ourselves rather than having it done to us.
But you said there's a threat of cannibalization and you're a little bit worried about it, but not enough to stop you from doing it. But that's a very big deal, right? You've got a giant established business and you're saying you want to go after customers you don't have. But generally at a company your size, that decision to sort of say we want to expand our market without risk, but usually people will say we'd rather protect the market we have rather than go after a new one. So can you just sort of help frame that decision for us? When did you make that decision and how difficult, or maybe it wasn't a difficult decision to make?
Well, we started distributing our content over broadband networks, mobile networks, as far back as 2005. Actually, we first got into it because we could see this as a trend and we wanted to learn more about it. Now, it's not riskless, but it's not reckless either. I mean, we sort of felt our way into that, learned a lot about how we had to distribute, learned a lot about how we could target these services away from existing Sky customers, and became increasingly, I think, skilled at that. So, I think you've actually got a very simple choice, right? Which you either sit there and just purely defend, or you actually say, you know what, I'm going to embrace and step into some of these trends, and then I'm going to have to figure out some of the trade-offs that will come. What we found is that actually we've been quite good at targeting different services to different parts of the population. So if you take our second brand, Now TV, it typically works very well with young urbanites, young people who live in city centres, perhaps don't want a full subscription service, and actually older people who similarly are not, a full service doesn't really work for them. Young families with kids, Sky does a brilliant job for them. And so we're targeting the services quite differently.
So people who read my website, people I talk to, a bunch of people I assume in this audience, I'll say, if you could let me pick and choose the channels I want, the shows I want, if I could watch a game whenever I want, that's what I want. I would dump the rest of my cable package. You're saying that's not the case with Sky, and it doesn't seem to be the case.
No, I think
across the industry.
My own view is it's wrong, I think, to define this market at the extreme. Right? I think what we're seeing is trends, and they will evolve over time, and therefore the way we think about it is to identify those big trends and position ourselves for them so we can push into them if they start to accelerate and grow. If you're the average Sky customer today, you're very happy. You like the all-you-can-eat service, you like one monthly payment, you know that Everything we're offering is going to be bundled in. If you take broadband from us, we're going to put money back into your pocket when you switch your supplier. That works for a lot of people. There's just a lot of people it doesn't work for. And so we need to develop different propositions that speak to both of those markets. And actually we find that so far there's not been a huge amount of disruption between them.
So Danny, you're in San Francisco, you've got a good sense of what the US market looks like, and you've got a sense of sort of how far ahead Sky is from where things are back in the US. But you want him to go faster, right? That's your job, is to sort of be the accelerant and the thorn?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of me joining the board, I think from Jeremy's perspective and the team's perspective, was just to make sure that they had one board member who was going to constantly pound away at them being courageous, which is, fundamentally what Jeremy is saying is, instead of being disrupted by other parties, we're going to disrupt ourselves, which takes a lot of courage, and as a very big company is very difficult to actually execute on.
But you want him to go faster, right? I was talking to him earlier, and he said, well, Danny's this West Coast guy, and he was slightly dismissive when he said that, and there are going to be things that we can't do, because we're not a startup, we're not a pedal to the metal thing, and we have this existing business that we have to maintain.
Yeah.
So I assume that is actually the real conflict, right, between the two of you, when there is conflict, is that you're pushing him to go faster than he either wants to or can go.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, it will, what has been fascinating for someone like me, who spends, I spend my time with smaller companies.
You invest in companies that are meant to disrupt and blow away companies of the size Jeremy runs.
That would be good. If he wasn't disrupting himself, we would be financing the disruptors. Yes. That's for sure. But what's been interesting is, a lot of the things that our companies have a fairly easy approach to changing are very difficult to do at Sky's scale. And things that are relatively easy for Sky are very difficult for my companies to do.
Give me an example.
So, I mean, for instance, I remember that when I joined the bet, Sky had created this component of their business called Sky Bet. And Sky Bet was sort of an idea that they had, why don't we provide a platform for folks to have fun and be able to take positions on the games that they're watching. And the level of the pace at which this became a very significant business was really impressive to see. And that is because of not only the core platform that Sky has, but the resources that they have at their disposal, including the management team that can actually operate something on such a national level.
So when you've got a company Sky size and it's all pointed in a direction, things can go very fast, get very big very quickly.
Yep.
The flip side, right, is you're talking about some of your companies being able to do things that they can't do, which is...
Flip side is, if you want to provide new fundamental technology into the existing set-top box, that's going to take a little longer than I would have expected. But that being said, it has to work for millions and millions of subscribers, so it has to work incredibly well. Whereas a lot of our companies, as you know, technology is iterative, and so you'll come out with something, it will mostly work, but it needs
the minimum viable product.
Exactly, and then you get a lot of goodwill and forgiveness from the audience when you're a startup. Whereas when you're the size of Sky, it's unacceptable to not be fully working at all times.
And you sort of hedge that in one way, right? For one of your products, you've gone on and done a deal with Roku, who's actually making a set-top box for you for your web product, right?
Yeah.
Does that frustrate you that you can't build your own tech as fast as you like or as fast as Danny would like?
I don't say it frustrates me. I think you've got to recognize that your different skills are required to do different things, and oftentimes they don't exist in the company. So we've got two choices. We can either choose to build those ourselves, and sometimes we do, but actually if we reach out and partner and work with people, very often we can get access to those skill sets, and they can be quicker than we can operate. So my own view is that really effective sort of strategy rarely comes from one place or one view, and actually what you've got to do is you've got to think about getting lots of different views and get access to lots of different skills. Accept that there's from time to time going to be some creative tension that exists between those two things, but manage that. And if you do that and then apply what we're good at, which is our scale, a huge marketing operation, the ability to deploy capital quickly, and have the right kind of culture and appetite for change, then you'll keep ahead of the challengers who are always going to keep coming.
Danny, startups can iterate quickly, and they can also pivot. They can say, this isn't working, we're done.
Yeah.
We're shutting down the company, or we're doing something entirely different. You don't really have that luxury. When can you decide to walk away from something that's not working?
Well, actually, I challenge that, because I think that we can walk away from things, very quickly. And actually, our appetite always will be to have a go, to try something, and if it works, fine, we'll push into it. If it doesn't, we can dispense with it. So, we have, as I said, we started distributing over mobile and fixed line networks very quickly. We had our own music service, which didn't work, and we closed it down rapidly. 3D.
I read an interview where you sort of bemoaning that, saying, we probably should have kept that going.
We probably should have kept it going, actually. In many respects, I wish we had, but, we chose not to, and we moved on. High definition, which we were probably the first major broadcaster in Europe in, has been a huge success and has driven a lot of our growth. Conversely, 3D hasn't really come through yet at the level which we said. So I think you have to have an appetite to get into new things, but then be quickly able to dispense with them and move on. Sometimes you get those things right, sometimes you don't.
And you also do some venture investing as well, right?
We do, yeah. We've got our own presence now in, on the West Coast. We're investing directly in companies that helps us give insight in terms of some of the new change and disruption
What's the point of you spreading some venture capital money around some very small startups? There's one called Pluto TV, which does sort of a web TV viewing guide. If you wanted that company, you could buy that company. It's not a significant amount of money. What's the upside for you spending a couple $1 million at a time on very small companies?
Often gives us insight. We may well have a seat on the board, and we can get greater exposure and understand, I think, in a greater level of depth than just simply observing what's happening. We can work with companies, and particularly we think of the UK and increasingly Europe, we can be a good partner for them as they think of expanding outside of the States. Typically, in my experience, a lot of startups on the West Coast, understandably, are very focused on their home market. But when they get further afield, they're actually looking for more help, and we can provide that. And then we can make investments in companies like anybody else that we think, using our own skills, that we think are just going to be winners. And if we make, whilst it's not a primary goal, but if we make good returns on the back of that, then fair enough. But I think it gives us a lot of greater insight and puts us more in the swale of what's going on. And look, results don't exist inside the business, right? They exist outside. So you need to be outside if you're going to understand what are the big effects. We
were talking backstage about sports and sports rights and your competition with BT. Longer term, are you more worried about someone like BT who's competing directly with you now for programming rights, or new competitors like a YouTube or Facebook, which has just gotten into video in a very big way almost overnight, or Netflix, which wasn't in this country until a couple of years ago, now it is?
Look, I think certainly, today we're increasingly competing and thinking about, the new global competitors who often are able to go very quickly across major markets, and they take, I think, more of our mind time than some of our traditional competitors in the UK. But actually, the thing I worry about is less about what anybody else is doing, more about how do we maintain our own appetite for change, constantly want to renew, have a culture that accepts, sometimes that'll go wrong, but actually more often we'll get it right. And so we can be at the forefront of change, because that's how we're going to best shape it and control, our own destiny, whoever we compete against. I can't control who we compete against. The only thing I can control is what Sky does and how it seeks to compete.
Danny, you mentioned before, like you get to sort of watch, you get this cool seat at the table, you get to watch what happens when Sky sort of turns in one direction and goes, and that's cool. But beyond that, right, the difference between what's the scale of Sky versus the scale of the companies you're investing in, right? If any of them got anything close to the size that Sky is, you'd be long gone, right? You want to be early in the company's history. So is there stuff that you can learn that's applicable, other than it's great to be really big when you're really big?
Oh yeah, I mean, first of all, if you look through the last 6-7 years, basically since Jeremy's become CEO, on what's happened with Sky. That amount of transformation and change inside one company, I mean, anyone can learn from. And certainly the fact of doing it at this scale is phenomenal. The other aspect
how is that applicable? Like, so what do you take back?
Well, it's just, from a strategic standpoint, how do you deal with all of these different players and sort of thinking through the long-term goal, aligning that long-term goal with all of these moving parts and making sure that you execute on a 5-year plan. That's really good discipline.
Right, but I mean, if one of your startups came to you and said, we have a 5-year plan, you'd probably say, you should go back out and try something else.
No,
right?
no, not at all.
No?
I mean,
5-year plans work in
5-year
startup
plans, no. The notion of having the rigor of a 5-year plan is fantastic. The question of whether you can execute on that 5-year plan as a startup is completely different. Whereas in the case of Jeremy and his team, they actually execute on it. But there are a lot of moving parts to actually make it happen. The other aspect is, how do you create for companies that are growing incredibly quickly? If you look at a Dropbox in the Bay Area or SoundCloud in Berlin, these companies are growing incredibly quickly. How do you actually develop the careers of people? How do you make sure that you get sort of a management team that is going to be able to scale at different levels while continuing to grow that quickly? How do you incentivize them? How do you move them around the organization? How do you establish a culture that is going to be lasting beyond just the fact that you're growing at rocket speed? That has been a massive lesson for me.
Since you brought up Dropbox and SoundCloud, those are 2 yours, right? Can we have a quick discussion?
We're investors. I wouldn't call them mine.
They're not yours. Yeah. Dropbox is worth a lot of money, maybe $10 billion. SoundCloud, $1 billion or so. Are we in a bubble? Are we not in a bubble? How do you feel about that?
The bubble concept, there are many people who are thinking through that. I would say that, what are we looking at? We're looking at how are these companies developing? How quickly is their model actually coming to a scale that is relevant to millions, if not hundreds of millions of people? And in those two cases, it looks just phenomenal. I mean, in those particular cases, the market not only looks massive, but their ability to execute and get their share of it is really fantastic. So Dropbox announced this deal with Microsoft yesterday, which is very transformational, actually not only for Dropbox, but for Microsoft. And SoundCloud announced a deal with Warner Music, which again, it just sort of gives you a sense of where user-generated content is going with very good professional content and how that is going to transform the industry over time.
So those guys are fine. Other companies, maybe a little bubbly.
Well, I mean, it depends. Sure, look, the bubbly in terms of companies, no. The appetite for investors in certain cases, how quickly they're writing checks, yes. I would say that that's more true in the Bay Area than it is in Europe, actually. I think people are way more tame here.
That's good news for this crowd. We're going to leave it there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you, sir.